The EM tool, pronounced M, is a command line scaffolding tool for Meteor applications. It automatically creates your project structure, files, and other boilerplate code. The reason I created it was I was sick of creating the same files and code over and over and over again. The structure that M uses mimics that of the Evented Mind publishing platform itself. You can find the M command line tool in GitHub, and since it's a command line tool, it's published to npm so that we can install it as a global node module. To install M, you can type sudo npm and then use the -g flag to make this a global installation, and we'll install Meteor-M. It will install some dependencies, and once the installation is complete, you can type em to get a list of commands. You can see the description for the command line tool here and its usage pattern here, and here's a couple of examples and the available commands. Most of the time we're going to be using the generate command to generate scaffolding for various parts of our application. Let me show you a few examples. Currently in my application, I have the standard 3 files that get created for you automatically by the Meteor command line tool. I'm going to start off by removing those. And then I'm going to use the init command of em to initialize a project structure. When I do that, you see a bunch of messages printed to the console showing different folders and files that have been created for me automatically. Let's open up Vim and take a look. The 3 folders we'll be using the most are both client and server. And as you guessed, things that execute on both the client and the server go into this folder. And things that should only be on the client go into this one, and things that only should be on the server can go into this folder. So underneath these folders, you'll see a little bit of duplication. For example, the collections folder is in all 3, the server, client, and both. And so if we want a collection to only be on the client, we can put it into this folder. Next, inside of the both folder, there's something called app.js. And that's just a global namespace for your application where you can put different helper methods that you want available everywhere. Also inside the both folder is a router folder. So M is designed to be used with the Iron Router. And since Iron Router routes can run on both the client and the server, we put our routes file into the both folder. Inside the routes file, you can see some standard configuration options, which you can customize to your liking. In this case, I'm using the options that are used in the Evented Mind platform. And then you see the boilerplate code written out for our route map function. If I navigate into the client folder, you can see a set of folders that are similar to the both folders. So we have collections, controllers, and views. And we also have our standard 3 application files, the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript file. If I open up the JavaScript file, you can see that the app namespace has already been created. And so if we want to create a client-only function on that app namespace, we can do it here. Then for any helpers that we want to be globally available, in Evented Mind at least, we put these into a helpers namespace. And so this has been created for you automatically. If you look at app.html, it's pretty empty because we're going to be putting most of our template code into something we call views. So if I navigate into the views folder, you can see a few subfolders have been created automatically. One is called layouts, and if I open that up, you can see that a master layout view has been created for us. And all it does is yield out our child template. Each view has a JavaScript file where we can put our event handlers, its helpers, and any lifecycle hooks. Then, of course, it has an HTML file with the template, and then a CSS file where we can put styles that are specific to this view. The next folder to look at is the shared folder. This is where I put templates that are shared across different routes. For example, the not found template and the loading template. Next, let me show you how to create some scaffolding. If I type mgenerate, or mg for short, you'll get a list of generators that we can use. A generator is just something that creates some files, folders, and boilerplate code for us. For example, for a collection or a package even. Let's say that I want to generate some scaffolding for a collection called items. I can type mg and scaffold and then name this items. And you'll see a bunch of things get generated for me automatically, including a collection, some methods, a default route, and a publish function. Let's take a look by opening up Vim and going through the project structure. The first thing to look at is a new items.js file has been added to the collections folder, and that's where our collection has been created on both the client and on the server. Down here you can see some helpful methods, or an example of some methods you can add to your items collection. You can put things like business logic here. Next, in the methods folder, this is where we would put client only, or methods that should execute on both the client and the server that are associated with our items collection. Here's an example method where we've prefixed the method with this app namespace. Inside the router folder, you can see a default route has been created for items.index, and it's put it at the root path. So if you want this to be somewhere else, like under items, you'd have to change this. This default route gets created for you because the scaffolding engine assumes that you want to have some kind of list view, and that's what is meant by this word index. Now this dot syntax here is just because I find it easier to read a bunch of routes when it's used this way, but you can change that if you'd like. You just need to change the template name converter and the route controller name converter, because what will happen is Iron Router will automatically look for a template that's called items index, like this, and a controller called items index controller. And that conversion process happens by specifying what type of conversion you want here. Okay, if we move down to the client, you can see that a collection file has been created there, but since we've already created the collection, it doesn't get recreated here. This is just for adding client-only methods. By default, our controller will get created as a client folder, or client controller, and here's where you can see the route controller and the three functions that you'll be using most often with route controllers. Next, in the views folder, you can see a new view folder has been created called items. And if we expand that, you can see one called items_index. So in the future, any kind of views that are associated with items, I'll go ahead and put them in this folder to keep things organized. Now inside of items index, you can see a standard view with an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. And this is where you can find the items index template, which we can then customize. The JavaScript file will contain the standard boilerplate for event handlers, helpers, and lifecycle hooks. On the server, inside the collections file, collections folder, there's the items.js file. Now, we don't create the collection here again because it's already been created. However, we do add the allow and deny rules. And so, by default, these allow and deny rules will return true for allow and false for deny, and you can just go in here and customize that as you wish. Finally, inside of the publish folder, there's an items folder where we can put different publish functions for this items collection. By default, there's one that's created for us called items index, and all it does is send the DDP ready message. But you'll probably replace this with something like return items.find. Next, let's try creating a new view for items. So I'll type mg, and we're going to generate a view. This time, I'm going to create a create item view, but I'm going to put it under the items folder. So a couple of files were created, and if we pop back into Vim and go into the client folder, we can see that a new view has been created under the items folder called create item. And here's our template and its corresponding JavaScript and CSS. Before we conclude, I want to show you one more folder, which is called the config folder. Inside the config folder, I have another folder called development, and in production, I have one called production. And inside these folders, I have an env.sh file and a settings.json file. I use both of these to initialize different environment variables and the Meteor settings that I want in my application. So you can use this and customize it as you like. A couple of concluding notes. This is a very early alpha stage project, and contributors are certainly welcome. So come on over to the GitHub page and file an issue with a feature request or a feature that you'd like to work on, or just take a look at the source code and feel free to ask any questions. The second is, why have yet another command line tool? At some point, I would like to integrate this into the Meteor command line tool, but currently it's not possible to add plugins to the Meteor command line tool, and so I had to make this separate. So hopefully sometime in the future, we can just integrate things and you won't have to worry about having a separate command line tool. But in the meantime, you can use this to help with your scaffolding needs.